Hey, how's it going, everyone? I've got what I hope will be a quick video showing you how to get up and running using Apollo GraphQL, specifically the ApolloBoost Client. It's the, I guess, easier of the two ways to configure a client, but it's a great way to get up and running, especially when you don't need the complexity provided with configuring the whole client yourself. So what we'll be doing in this video is we've got a little form here. It's a React app where we can enter our GitHub token. So I can just paste that in. And that's stored in session storage that you can see down here. And now that this is in here, what we're going to do is we're going to configure Apollo to use this token to make a request to GitHub's GraphQL API so that we can pull down all of my starred repositories. So if I just pop over here to the GitHub GraphQL playground, here we've got our GraphQL query. We're asking for the viewer, which is myself. We're getting my ID along with the last 25 repositories that I've starred. So we're getting some information about them, their ID, their name, their description, etc. And then we're getting the languages used in those repositories. And as you can see over here on the right where we're viewing the data, it obviously, because it's GraphQL, it matches the format, and we can see that recently I've started GraphQL guard. But let's get going with the React side of things. So we have a Create React app that right now is, I was actually playing around with the new hooks coming in React 16 version 7 right now, the alpha version that's out now. So what I'm doing is I'm storing the token in session storage, and so that's where it's coming from, so that when I refresh the page, I don't have to re-enter it every time. I'm not going to go over how to use hooks or the form to capture it. I have another video about the React hooks that goes over all of this, so check that out if you're interested. But what we're specifically interested in doing is configuring Apollo. So we're going to go to the command line, and we need to add some repositories to use. So we will add ApolloBoost. This is the client, or the code that's used to connect to GitHub's API. React Apollo. These are specifically the React bindings for the Apollo package. We want the GraphQL package and GraphQL tag, which will help us write the GraphQL queries. So this should be pretty quick, and then we'll just start up the server again as soon as this is done. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to assume that will still load fine. It's just compiling or something right now. There we go. All right, so let's get in there and start using this client. So what I'm going to do is create an Apollo client JavaScript file, which is where I'll define the client. And to do that, we will import the ApolloBoost class from ApolloBoost. And what we want to do is create a new instance of this, where we're going to pass in sort of any information it needs to both connect to the API, but also if we need to modify the headers or things like that before we make the request. So the main thing you're always going to need to provide is the URI, or where that API is located. So if we go into the GitHub documentation, or in the forming calls with GraphQL section, they show the endpoint down here. So we're just going to copy and paste that. So that's our URI. But in order to connect specifically to the GitHub GraphQL API, we need to provide that token that I was displaying as one of the headers, so that they know who is connecting and if we have permission to access the data that we're requesting. So the way you do that is you can modify the ApolloBoost client by providing a request option. And what this will receive is a function which receives something called the operation. And what we can do to that operation is call a setContext function, passing in some headers that we want to add to each request as it's being made. So this isn't something that runs once on sort of instantiation of the ApolloBoost client. It happens before every request that's made. So here we will be providing the authorization header. And if you come back here and you scroll down just a little bit, you can see that it's looking for the authorization header. Specifically, the value will be bearer and then the value of the token after that. So we'll say bearer space, and then we will embed. And if I just come back here, I can pull it out of session storage. Cool. So once I save that and I export this client as default, we are ready to go to hook up this client to our React code. So the way we do that is we go into typically sort of as high up the component tree as possible, and we include the Apollo provider. So let's import that. So import Apollo provider from React Apollo package, which are the React bindings for Apollo. And we'll just wrap that component right up at the top of our component tree, so that anywhere inside of here, which will be our entire application, has access to making GraphQL queries. So we need to provide it the client, but we don't have that value yet. So we just need to import that. So import client from Apollo client, and then we'll pass that into the Apollo provider. So if I go back to the app, great, it still works, but we're obviously not doing anything yet with GraphQL. So let's see how to make our first query now that we've set up the Apollo client using ApolloBoost. And to do that, we'll come down and take a little bit of a look at the return of this app function component. So if we have a token, right now I'm just displaying the token. Otherwise, we would have displayed that little form to ask the user to enter it. So here's where I want to, if that is true, meaning we are able to make GraphQL requests, we'll just include another component that does not exist yet. So what we're going to do is we'll create a new component called, we'll just call it start repos. And we'll come in here and we'll import React from React. And because I know we need it, we will import query from React Apollo to allow us to make a query. And we will also import GQL from GraphQL tag. So you could call this what you want, but I typically use GQL. So we'll start at the component and then we'll add things as we need them. So what I'm going to do is just, we'll just do this as a functional component here. And we'll actually just do an implicit return. And here I'll export this as default. So export default starred repos. Okay, so here we have a component that so far does nothing. But what we want to do is have it perform a query. So what do we need to provide to the query component? We need to provide the query for it to perform. So we'll need to fill in a value here. So we'll just create this up here, starred repos query, and we'll use the GQL code to construct a query. And the way this works is you typically start by saying the word query and you give it a name. This can be anything you want to call it, so we can just call it start repos query. And then inside of it is where you construct your actual GraphQL code that we were looking at over here in the playground. So what I'm just going to do is copy this whole from the viewer down, and we'll put that in here. So it's not auto-formatting right just because I have an error. And what I need to do is just pass this query down to our query component. Cool. So the formatting's a little bit off still, but I think, there we go. As soon as I save that, Prettier will do its thing, but that sort of screwed us down here, right? Okay, so what you pass as the child of the query component is actually an embedded function. So we'll embed the function here. And what this function receives are a number of things, but two of them that you can extract from the object you're being passed is the data that you're receiving and loading. And loading is a Boolean which tells us whether it's still performing the query or not. So what we'll do is we'll just say if loading, meaning we don't have the data yet to display it. We'll just return a span that says loading. All right. Save that and get some nice formatting going on. So if I come down here, I know at this point that I do have data. I don't really know well, I do know what it looks like, because it's GraphQL. So I know that if I access data, I have data.viewer, which has .start repositories, .nodes, which is an array of these. So I do have this information. So what we'll do is we will return, and we're going to map over the different repositories. But before we do this, why don't we just check to make sure it's working? So what I can do is I'll just do a div here, and in the div, I'm going to say json.stringify data. And this will just allow me to look on the screen to make sure that it's working correctly. So if I come down here and reload, it does nothing, and that's just because I haven't used this this component yet. So we'll come back to our app, and we need to replace this displaying of the token here with our component. So we'll import starred repos from starred repos. Cool, and we'll display that as soon as we have a token, meaning we can make the GraphQL request. So you come back here, it says loading for a sec. That was that Boolean I talked about, and now we have access to all of the data pulled back from the GraphQL API. So at this point, you're just in straight up normal React. I won't display it super nicely. I'll just loop through it, and you can see just sort of quickly what it looks like. So what we're going to do is data.viewer, type. Then we'll access the starred repositories. Specifically, we want the nodes. Nodes give us the actual array of repositories here. And what we're going to do is map them. So here we've got a node, and what I want to return back will just be a div. And you know what? Let's make it more semantic. Let's return a UL. And inside of the UL, I'm just going to grab this here. Sorry if that was confusing, but let's step back here. We're going to return a UL, and inside the UL, we are going to loop through over these repositories. We'll create an LI for each one of them. And anytime you're mapping, you need the key, right? So we'll add the key on there, which is the node.id. And we will just display the node.name. And just for fun, why don't we link out to that repository? We'll just add a target blank on that so it opens a new tab, and our href will be the node.url. All right, I've messed up something. Let's try to figure that out. So I'm embedding this. Okay, this is the end of this, but I never closed off the map. Ooh. So let's give me a little error. Using target blank is a security risk, add rel opener. Okay, let's do that so that's happy. There we go. And let's see how it looks. Sweet. So now we have a list of all the last 25 repositories that I have starred in my GitHub account. So I can click into one of them, GraphQL Guard, and it will pop that open into a new tab. And that's the whole demo for today. Just to talk about where this is going, I'm going to be producing another video which will go into more detail on how to set up and configure your Apollo clients without using ApolloBoost. So this is going like deep and configuring absolutely every part of it yourself, how to handle errors, how to handle setting custom headers, etc. And I'm going to have articles that I'll eventually link to both this video and the future ones that I do. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a great day. Take care. Bye.